and be free from discrimination and prejudice. It also aims to eliminate gender-based disparities, stereotypes, and biases, fostering a society then which has a certain level of equality, means that where everyone has equal values and rights and opportunities, regardless of their gender. And when we speak about the Arab region, and this is the focus, maybe why we focus on the real context, because we speak about the inequality and in the region, but it's also globally. No one is in track of achieving SDG 7 related to energy. Even more when it comes to real context, countries in conflicts, and also when you speak about the not only access to electricity, but also clean fuel technologies. And when you speak about these two indicators, we automatically look at how this impacts human being. And in the real context, unfortunately as well, or fortunately, I don't know how we can say, more than 90% of the human power are women, because they work in the agricultural sector and productive activities. And we come across a project that we implemented in Lebanon, Jordan, and in Tunisia, where we look at how to promote small-scale renewable energy technologies in the rural area. And basically, although the projects are still considered as one of the best case studies and business models, because it looks at the integrated approach in terms of addressing the energy, but making energy as an enabler. However, it's opened also opportunities for improvements where we have policy gap, also access to finance, access to technology, and access to capacity building. I don't want to take it on a negative tone, but just I wanted, wherever we do a speech, I've been, I would say, advised, we'll start with opportunities and the positive tones, and then we look into the challenges, but the solutions. And the solutions are those that address the challenges. But before going that, just I want, maybe I had 3 figures that I took from the inequality report, where it looked at in the Arab region from an income generation perspective, you have women having that income less than a quarter of what men perceive. And at the same time, when we look at the global gender index globally, in the Arab region, the region as a whole is ranked 68th. But in the bottom 10, you have 3 from the Arab region. So just maybe this is an indication, because I think we have other international organizations most qualified in terms of looking at renewable energy from a socioeconomic perspective, and the impact on gender and how to move forward in this agenda. That's why I had the privilege also to have the 2 very interesting and not only empowered women, but highly qualified women in the energy sector, where they will look at how we, the focus of our session today is looking to renewable energy, but looking from a gender perspective and the socioeconomic benefit of that, and the way forward in terms of solutions. And we will have Diala Hawliya. She's a program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And then since government institutions maybe put in the enabling environment policy framework in order to address the gender gap, still lag behind, be it in the region and globally, and that's why we need to see how the private sector, our service providers, can support that. And since the conference was in a way that addresses and also try to attack researchers, so we were very happy to see that one of the researchers finalizing and completing her PhD, Laura Helfquist, and sorry for my pronunciation, she's from the School of Orient and African Studies, University of London. And she's working on how the public sector, public and private sector partnerships benefit the end user in renewable energy provision, and looking at the gender perspective. And then we have we'll have the opportunity to have a very interesting dialogue as per my assessment, since I'm lucky to have some of very knowledgeable also speakers and experts in this field. We'll have Christine Lins, our global partner from the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, GWNet, and she's unfortunately attending virtually because she couldn't make it in person. And thanks for joining us. We'll have also Asma Wabhia. She's from the GOLOBS United Nations Foundations, but she's also the co-chair of the Global SDG 7 constituency. Thanks for joining us, Asma. We have also Shada Sharif from Sustain MENA Jordan, but also a very active person from a policy perspective at the Office of the Prime Minister of Jordan. And we have also Mohamed Ziad Gannar. He's a sustainable energy expert in Tunisia. He used to work for the UN ESCWA and supporting the implementation of the Region project. And he is also following with us in Tunisia, completing this work and supporting the gender empowerment, but also how to use renewable energy as an enabler. And we have also with us after the Laura Diala joining the panel discussion. The purpose is really to look at the opportunities, but also solutions. Without further ado, allow me to give the floor to Diala. If you can just, the colleague, if you can display the presentation of Diala on the screen, so she can give us some quantified figures on the latest report that Irena have been working on, and the latest report that also was launched at the GA earlier this year. Diala, the floor is yours, and happy to have you with us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Radia. Very happy to be here with you and to discuss this very important topic on gender. It is very important for us that organizations like ESWA give this topic such a nice platform, such as this one. And it's also very nice to see a lot of women in the room, and especially in high-level positions. Unfortunately, this is not yet the case everywhere in the industry or in the sector, as we will see in this presentation. So at IRENA, we focus, I should be pointing this way maybe. Okay, at IRENA, we focus a lot on the socioeconomic benefits of the energy transition. So as we transition from today's energy system and to the futures that is based on renewable energy, we need to make sure that this transition leaves nobody behind. So there are some people who are going to lose jobs, for example, in the fossil fuel industry or in other sectors that are not going to be very relevant. So we need to make sure that the jobs that are created in the future energy mix are enough and are of high, not just number, of also high quality, so that this transition brings benefits to all societies and communities. Now, along this transition, we need to make sure that it's not only a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but it also is a transition from sometimes nothing. So people who don't have access to energy yet, which are a lot, unfortunately, today, that they are also integrated in this energy transition. And one of those, I'm sorry. And one of the people we look into integrating are obviously women. We are half of the world's population, but when it comes to renewable energy or the energy sector in general, we do not get the chance to participate as actively as men do. So in IRENA, we also analyze, or we focus on the gender dimension of the energy transition of the renewable energy sector. So as part of our analysis on jobs in renewable energy, we found that there were 12.7 million jobs in renewables in 2021. Those are expected to grow to 38.5 million in 2030. But if we look at the composition or the percentage of women in jobs, we see, and these are the analyses that we've been doing since 2019, we see that the renewable energy sector in general is 32% women, employs 32% women. This is higher than the oil and gas sector, where we see 22% only are women. But when we dig into different technologies, we see different percentages. So in the solar PV sector, we have 40% women. And in the wind industry, there are 21% women only. So I would like to focus a bit this presentation on women in solar PV, but also in the access context, so that we discuss at the same time different SDGs. So SDG 7, which is universal access to clean energy, and SDG 5. and along with children are the main, let's say, impacted people from the lack of energy when it is lacking. When it comes to, for example, lack of energy access, it is women who have to do the bulk of work of collecting the wood or collecting alternate sources. They are the ones who are mostly impacted by the indoor air pollution of cooking using, let's say, dirty fuels. And also, when there is lack of energy, there is lack of services such as healthcare and education, which also impact women the most. So access to affordable and reliable and sustainable modern energy, which is the Sustainable Development Goal 7, can have a transformative impact on productivity, incomes, and overall well-being of populations, and especially women. So women, it frees up their time from collecting wood and doing drudgery work to do higher income or higher quality jobs. It has strong cross-cutting links to other sectors, as I mentioned, like healthcare, like education, that can improve women's lives. But at the same time, modern energy infrastructure and technology tend to reach women the last. To ensure equitable and inclusive outcomes of efforts to transition, we need to make sure that women are integrated in the energy transition. So we started working on gender in 2019. We did a big survey. And in this survey, we also looked at the access dimension. So this is where solar PV is also very active. We saw that we had over 835 respondents that were active in the energy access context that filled the survey. We see that more than a third of these respondents were working in organizations with fewer than 20 people. So those are small SMEs, small and medium enterprises that are working in access in solar. And when we look at, so 39% of them are standalone systems like solar home systems and biodigesters. So we asked them, what are the barriers to women's participation in deploying renewables? 72% of them responded that these are cultural and social norms that are hindering from participating in the solar sector. 49% of them, almost half, said that there is lack of gender-sensitive policies. So when policies are introduced to deploy renewable energy, they do not account for gender, they are gender neutral. And in this way, they continue to favor men over women. There's lack of gender-sensitive training opportunities. 41% of them said that. So whenever we're giving training opportunities, we don't tailor them specifically to women. And because of the cultural and social norms that we just discussed, women always have a wrong self-perception of themselves. So they perceive themselves as not having the right skills or the right training to attend those trainings or to have the ambition to be included in the industry. We saw that 41% also said that there is inequity in ownership of assets. So this also relates to the cultural and social norms where the assets are generally owned by the men. So the women don't have, for example, land, they don't have capital, they cannot access financing, so they cannot participate actively in the sector. We also saw a lot, 37% talked about the lack of mentorship opportunities. So there is no mentorship, and mentorship is very important to support women. And because it's not only about giving them the right skills, it's about mentoring them enough so that they can identify what are the skills that they need and what are their ambitions to fill those skills gaps. So the lack of skills were identified as 34% said that. So just to talk a bit about the cultural and social norms, because as we saw, all these barriers are intertwined, but a lot of them have their roots in the cultural and social norms, especially if we talk about rural areas or we talk about particular regions. We saw that women allot a significant amount of their time to household work. So there is this subconscious, or maybe it's something that we inherited it from the old cultures, where women are supposed to be the main caregivers or caretakers of the family, whether children or elderlies. And so they dedicate most of their times on these skills, and they dedicate less times on developing skills that can be used outside of the household. Also, they tend to have less access to information, skills, training, and labor markets. And as we mentioned as well, the assets and the financing. So this influences their decision-making power and exercise of voice and agency, and constrains their access to land and productive resources. And so this is why understanding how intra-household gender hierarchies influence technology assets. And this is also important because it's not only about how women are integrated into the sector, but also how women can be beneficiaries of these technologies. Because since the men are the ones who purchase or make these decisions in the households, usually let's say the preferences of the women are not always integrated in the solutions that we provide. So just moving on, as Radia said, let's talk about some of the solutions and not only the barriers. So there we have identified some measures to improve women's engagement in deploying renewables, and they're very similar to the measures that are outside of the access context. But when we are talking about the rural setting, it makes more sense to focus on these ones. So increasing access to training and development programs, skills developments and training, and as we said, including in mentorship also programs. Integrating gender perspective in energy access programs from the outset. And we see more and more development banks like the World Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Bank, they all have the women or the gender perspective integrated from the outset of the programs or policies that are supporting renewable energy. We also saw that 56% of respondents think enhancing access to financing for women is important. So have dedicated funds that can be dedicated to women entrepreneurs. Mainstreaming gender in energy policies, and we will talk about this in a minute. And awareness raising, so raising awareness among women, sharing experiences. More women talk about their successes and how they manage to become entrepreneurs or run businesses. So there we have identified many entry points in the development of renewable energy projects. So this is one that discusses mini grids, but there are different parts of the value chain of renewable energy where women add a lot of value. For example, when we talk about mini grids in the rural settings, starting from the consultations and planning, we need to collect data that includes women. So collect the voices of women so that we know what the energy is used for, to predict the demand and what are the productive uses that are going to come out of these solutions. And then in the construction phase, we can include women in the direct workforce, as we mentioned, if the skills and training are provided, but also in the social and environmental safeguards, these need to consider the women's needs. So as I mentioned, when we're talking about especially funding from multilateral development banks, all the safeguards that need to be put in place to ensure the community benefits and engagement, it makes a lot of sense to integrate the women in these consultation. And then when it comes to operating the power plants, women can collect revenues and provide services and repairs. They support female-headed households, of course, because we also saw that, especially in the cook stove sector, when women are selling clean cook stoves, women can sell 3 times more cook stoves than men, especially to other women, because women like to take advice from each other. They like to learn from each other's perspectives and experiences. And women tend to trust more other women who use the technology rather than seeing a man just as a salesman who has never used that technology. So it is very important to include women in these activities in terms of giving confidence and experiences about the use of technology. And then when it comes to the development of productive uses, women can be the beneficiary, but also support socioeconomic development inside the household, but outside in community projects like schools, like clinics, etc. So this is a slide about data because right here today, we are all either come from policy making or researchers, and we all face the same problem when it comes to gender and socioeconomic benefits in general, that we don't have enough data. And the lack of data can have a bad repercussion on the policies. So for example, if we don't have accurate data, we may underestimate how serious this issue is, or how underrepresented women are in these policies or programs or projects. And this may lead to this continued way of doing things where we don't include them the way we should. So data-informed policies are critical to the achievement of gender equality, so that we formulate our policies around these inequalities and these disparities. So just before I end my presentation, I want to just go outside of the access context, outside of the rural context, and talk a bit about, and talk a bit very quickly about the general context. So as I mentioned, we did the study on wind and the study on solar, and we see that the concentration of women, even when it comes to renewable energy jobs, is usually not in science and technological fields. They usually tend to go to administrative fields. And also, not just administrative fields, they also like to shy away from managerial roles and high-level roles. And as we were discussing with Radia today, even we have difficulties recruiting women in high-level positions. So you can see here that this issue is in the renewable energy sector in general, where women tend to occupy less STEM roles than others. And also in the wind sector, you see the women in STEM are 14% of the workforce. In non-STEM, they are 20%, and in administration, they are 35%. So women like to favor administrative roles rather than other roles. And this goes back to the social and cultural norms, and goes back to the self-perception that they are more suited for these jobs, or that they need to prioritize their household duties over the workforce, so they tend to take less demanding jobs and roles. Now, when it comes to the solar, when it comes to the solar industry, again, we see 50% of administration are women. Non-STEM and technical are 30%, but technical is 38%, other non-technical is 35%, and STEM is 32%. Now, solar, something very interesting that we see is that you see a lot of technical jobs that are not STEM related, and a lot of them are based in manufacturing. And because in a lot of the jobs, manufacturing jobs, so this is not related to the rural context, but it's a general issue, is that manufacturing, obviously, we know is concentrated in Asia. And in Asia, we see a lot of women in manufacturing jobs, but it's also part of the social and cultural norms of Asian countries. So those are technical jobs, but they are not STEM jobs. They are not managerial roles. So this is why we see in solar, there are higher number of jobs in technical, higher number of women in technical jobs. So when we talk about management and senior management, we see that although 40% of solar PV is women, we see that only 30% is in management, and senior management has only 17% women. In wind, it's worse. In management, we only have 13% women, but 8% only in senior management. But wind in general is less represented by women than solar. And I think it's also because of this concentration of solar in manufacturing in Asia, where women typically work. And the last one, in the oil and gas, we see 13% are only women. So the barriers there, we identified barriers to entry and retention. So for women to advance to senior positions, they need to be retained. And there are different barriers, but they are mainly when it comes to entry, it is mainly the self-perception or the preferences. But when it comes to keeping or retaining women, for them to reach senior and managerial positions, We see that lack of fairness and transparencies in internal policies are a barrier. So sometimes the recruiting or the management tend to prefer the men just because, and the policies are not very transparent. And then the lack of flexible work hours and lack of policies to support women who still need to or still perceive themselves as the main caregivers in the household. We saw that a lot of this changed during COVID, but now that we are all going back to working from offices, we might see this, we might take another step backwards. And also barriers to advancement or the rural context, those are more generic, where we talk about fair and transparent internal processes for recruitment. We stress a lot on the importance of mentorship programs and on understanding and addressing the wage gaps, because we still see wage gaps between men and women. And sometimes these tend to be because men are by nature more capable of negotiating their salaries. Us women, we tend to shy away from these topics. We tend to not really, we see it as us being demanding when we're negotiating a new job. We don't like to discuss salaries. So there are some things that are related to the system, but there are also some other things that are related to the nature of women. And this is where the mentorship and training are essential, so that we train women to ask as much as men do. We see a lot of other solutions here, and it's nice that we have Ms. Christine Lins with us to talk about GWNet, because we identify it and other networks such as this one as very important for mentorship and putting women together. So this is really the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I look forward to taking them. Thank you.
Thank you, Diara, for the very, very interesting presentation and insight on the subject matter. And before taking questions, I would like to give the floor to Laura to tell us more about the public-private partnership business model and how this can support the gender agenda. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Redek and Esqua for this event, and of course, inviting me to speak to you about the energy access to the rural areas of the global south. So the Sustainable Development Goal targets ensuring access to clean and affordable energy to all. Providing energy access is crucial, as it is recognized as the key enabler of overall economic and social development, and it directly affects other Sustainable Development Goal objectives simultaneously. Therefore, what are the mechanisms and methods of upgrading energy technologies and bridging the path towards sustainable energy services, particularly if the targeted shareholders live in extreme poverty and the intended rural areas are far from any existing energy infrastructure? There is much that needs to be done, as around 775 million people are without sufficient electricity access. This disproportionately affects sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asian populations. The traditional methods of disseminating energy access, such as extending the grid, might not be an option, as this option carries high upfront costs, long lead times, and in certain cases, it might never be an option, as there are several hard to reach geographical communities in the rural areas. So in this context, the public-private partnerships, I will be calling them PPPs, are an invaluable strategy for bridging the gap in SDG 7 objectives. And the PPPs are currently used in over 134 countries and account around 15 to 20% of the total infrastructure investment. The PPP model was previously used solely for large infrastructure projects, but the trend is moving more and more towards utilizing it as an execution model in rural small-scale renewable energy projects. So what are PPPs? There is no single definition for this model of project execution, and the structure of PPPs depend on location, targeted stakeholders, and the project nature. However, there are several fundamental factors present in most of these type of arrangements. In its most basic form, these PPPs imply that the government bundles the investment and service provision into one single long-term contract in partnership with private sector participants. The government can respond to social concerns and empower local stakeholders by blending profit motivations with development projects through these type of arrangements. PPPs overcome several barriers in mobilizing financing, such as macroeconomic and political instability that has led to stringent lending conditions in recipient countries. And also it works very well when a vast majority of the customers of the intended rural energy services live in poverty and cannot pay unsubsidized prices for energy systems. So this is where the model has proved to be extremely successful, especially if we look at those dispersed communities in rural areas. And that is the reason why it is so popular at this very moment as an execution model, as it specifically offsets the demand risk for the private sector and the companies working in the field. I have selected one widely used definition of PPPs, and it's from the Green Paper of the Commission of the European Communities, and it is from 2004. And it defines PPPs as forms of cooperation between public authorities and the world of business, which aim to ensure the funding, construction, renovation, management, or maintenance of infrastructure or the provision of service. There are several delivery mechanisms within PPP strategies. And when we look at rural energy projects, some of the most used models are the supply push model, which focuses on developing and improving renewable energy technology, and it reduces the costs efficiently. Then we have the demand pull, whereby offering microfinancing, for example, to the end users functions as a demand pull. So this strategy aims to create demand amongst the end users for these renewable energy systems. Then we have the cooperative model, and this is a model where the community owns the renewable energy system collectively. And this offsets the issue associated with one single person or household having to have the burden of taking loans and credits towards adopting such a system. Then we also have the fee-for-service model, and this is where the private sector company actually owns the renewable energy system and only charges for the energy used and the service of the device. So in this, the end user does not have to apply for long and burdensome loans and financings. So as a practical example, I have studied PPP in Bangladesh very extensively, and they had an extremely successful, it was called the most successful off-grid electrification program in the world at one point in time. So ITCOL launched their solar home systems program initially in 1997. But this program actually went on for years, failing. But once the World Bank came in and they formed a public-private partnership jointly to disseminate these type of off-grid solar energy systems to the rural areas of Bangladesh, the program took off like it has never been seen before. So this strategy that they applied was able to create and introduce vibrant market conditions to private sector players in Bangladesh. This arrangement was able to attract both private and foreign direct investment. And at the end of the program, there were 9 other multilateral development banks and agencies in support of the program. And the overall investment that they were able to gather surmounted $696 million over the course of the program. And over 20 million people got access to electricity through this project. However, within 10 years of the project, the installation numbers fell, and the program was never able to recover from that point onwards. And some of the reasons for this was the project design, as World Bank advocated for a market-oriented reform, which resulted in the renewable energy project design and implementation model based solely on financial terms and driven by market forces. So they very much left the socioeconomic character of the end users out of their project plan. And then the subsidy structure was designed to decrease over the years, but the financial support for the program was reduced too much and too fast, making the product way too expensive for the customer. And this created a cycle of debt, as many of the end users then defaulted on their loans. There were, of course, several other factors that contributed to the difficulties of the program, but the subsidy structure was one of the main reasons, and this was not accounted for well enough in the planning and the design phase of this public-private partnership strategy. So therefore, how can we overcome some of the barriers that we have recognized in these PPP models? So the impacts of PPPs on the end user are quite scarcely studied, but the lack of engagement with the stakeholders is a very common shortcoming in project preparation, as I mentioned with the case of Bangladesh. The quality of technology and after-sales services are crucial in the long term. For example, initially in the solar home systems program, no quality standards were issued nor enforced, which affected the reputation of the technology and thereby affected the number of people signing on. And the lack of after-sales services resulted in many abandoning their systems and reverting back to diesel or kerosene or whatever other form of energy they were using prior to adopting these solar home systems. So we do need energy technology specific policies. One size fits all does not work. If we design, implement, and evaluate energy projects with the target community in mind, we will overcome some of the current barriers, such as external political, institutional, cultural, and social factors. The pricing and loan structure are key to PPP structure success. Often, the profit margins are high in the renewable energy systems that are sold, which then makes these systems way too expensive for the customer and the end user. So we're already from the offset, they simply cannot afford the systems that we're trying to target for them to have. Also, the end user financing has to be adjusted to the local end user level. The loans and interest rates paid by the local consumer are still too high. So these then trap the customer in a long cycle of debt, and usually it ends the customer defaulting on the agreed loans, and then they will have a huge debt burden. They will not be able to enjoy the benefits that the solar home systems or any other renewable energy system will bring. And then in addition, they will have to pay for an additional, most likely fossil fuel-based energy source. So lastly, I will speak about the nexus between PPPs and gender. As for ensuring more successful interventions, it is vital to design energy project interventions that correspond to the needs of women and promote systems that are easy to use and operate. Project design, implementation, and evaluation stages must consult women through every stage of the project cycle to ensure that the project has the intended impact on women. In many renewable energy projects, women have no voice at all, or are consulted very superficially without any actual impact on project design or implementation. And this is what I have seen very often in the case studies that I have researched, that in the project paperwork and documentation, you do have women consulted as stakeholders, but that has actually never translated on the ground, which is a completely missed opportunity. And then evidence-based policy approach should be the guideline when we design these type of energy policy interventions. And even today, several legal biases against women exist, and the legal and regulatory framework can significantly affect women's ability to access loans and credits, so they can then access these type of renewable energy systems that are supposed to empower them in the long term, but this is completely overlooked in project planning. The end user pricing structure must be adjusted to the local income levels, and women's unequal access and control over resources and services should be taken into account when we plan and design these type of projects. Most often, even with subsidized pricing, microcredit loan interest rates and payback periods are unaffordable and unattainable to many women. Energy projects should include gender-specific affordability analysis every single time they're being planned and implemented. So this concludes my presentation today. I would like to thank everybody, and it was a great pleasure sharing some of the results of my research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the very insightful presentation. And while it does confirm certain of the funding of the first presentation provided by Diala, but also it does also include certain insight in looking at the business model where basically the project design and planning, this is the critical issue where we face independently whether we put policies in place or not, but if when the implementation in designing project and implementing them and doing the complete cycle of planning, the gender dimension is not well considered, then obviously we will be off track of achieving SDG 7. Without further ado, allow me to open the panel discussion, and certainly in order not to just focus on the Arab region, because whatever we do, we need to learn from other best practices or other challenges that we face globally. And that's why, I don't know, Christine, are you online with us, Christine?
I am online and I can hear you very well. Good morning.
Thank you very much. And thanks first again for joining us. And I would have loved to see you in person, but yeah, maybe next time. And just I believe you listened to the both presentations provided by Laura and Diala, where we, although we intend to look at to the rural context, but obviously the challenges differ when look at, let's say, from the wider perspective of the sustainable energy systems. And that's why from your network, the Global Network for Women, which as a network, I mean, one of the first that I come across when working in this, the issue or related to the gender, but also energy. From your perspective, how you see the role of women in, let's say, we see it from the role first, and then we look at to the challenges, because I would like to hear from your perspective, from a global perspective, how you see the role of women in terms of supporting, accelerating the sustainable energy system, the role that they can undertake, and the opportunities to support and enable the just inclusive energy transition. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation to be here with you, at least virtually, for this event. Greetings to you all. Greetings also to Diala, with whom we've been working for many years on these fantastic numbers that Diala has put out there. Because a couple of years ago, you know, there was not a lot of knowledge about the role of women in the energy sector, and now everybody quotes these 32% that Diala has stated, which is more than the share of women in oil and gas, but we still see its limitations, and we also see that when we go up the career ladders, that the share of women is declining, and this is really a pity, and especially at the moment in many countries around the world, post-pandemic, we face talent shortage, and I think we must make it very clear that this industry or any industry is only going to thrive if it manages to attract the best talents of both men and women. And I don't think that the energy sector can afford not to take up talent of half of the population. And in that sense, we also have economic evidence of many studies that companies with diverse leadership have better economic results. And this is, I think, very important to say. They are better prepared to survive financial shock. They have less subject to risk, and they often have more stringent decarbonization policies. So what we clearly advocate for is to advance the role of women in this field. There are many methods to do this. Data is really crucial, because if we don't have data, then it's difficult to hold our decision makers accountable. And then, we need all these surrounding elements, such as mentoring programs, such as networks, all these issues. But what I also would like to state and would like to stress, I mean, you work here in the Arab region, and we've just, we conduct these programs now since many years in many different parts of the world. We have mentoring programs in which more than 700 women from over 70 countries have participated in the last years, and they range from technical programs for women in wind, women in energy storage, women in clean cooking, but we also have programs focused on different geographic jurisdictions. We had something for women in Central Asia, we have something for the MENA region, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa. And what we notice is that the issues and the challenges women face are very similar in all parts of the world. So we just conducted about 3 weeks ago a study tour where we brought together 23 participants from our mentoring programs from 17 different countries. And one of the realizations of many of these participants was that the issues that women face, be it glass ceiling, be it difficulty to combine work and family life, the lack of flexibility, the lack of mentorship, the lack of training is very similar across different cultural contexts. And actually, when they see that others have similar issues, on the one hand, this is reconforting, but it also gives them strength to then discuss strategies how to overcome these issues. In that sense, we consider that networks are really and absolutely crucial, be it regional ones. We also operate a network of national and regional women in energy networks, where we put people together. We see ourselves, our role as the one connecting the dots, so that others can learn from each other and share best practices and share experiences. And I think this is really important. And a workshop like yours is really contributing to shedding light on the subject and on the topic.
Thanks, Christine. I will get back to you on the follow-up question, just in order to have the flow of the at least the ideas based on the setting the scene that Yela and Laura have made. You did mention, and we had in the presentations, looking to the capacity building, and basically sometimes the misperceptions, but in order to have opportunities for employment. But although just in addition to the statistic provided by Diela, in the UN system, we found out that for professional positions, women would not apply unless they have minimum 80% of the chance to get selected. They fit with the requirement. When men, even 1%, they would apply for the job. And that's why you find difficulties even within the UN escort to recruit to have women in professional positions and even less in leadership positions. And that's why the education, not only the capacity building, but also the education. And maybe I want to divert to my kind young friend, Asma Wabhia, very inspiring person and very active in the supporting the SDG 7 globally. And thanks to her, I have now a lot of youth that are monitoring globally as well in different continents of the world. From your perspective, how you see the education, but also the capacity building helping not only the women, but also youth in terms of really having opportunities, grab the opportunities, but also supporting the energy transition.
All right, it's working. First, thank you so much. Big thank you to Ms. Radia for always supporting me and for being a great mentor, as she said. I first knew her during HLD, the High Level Dialogue on Energy in 2021, and it was COVID at that time, but we got the chance to interact virtually, and then I met her in person a couple of times during IRENA Assembly, and also in New York for the SDG 7 expert group meeting. And this is something, one of the crucial things before I answer the question. Mentorship is really important. I believe you are mentoring your kids, your siblings. It is very important to mentor different generations and to share from our knowledge and experience. I personally now mentor girls, especially with Girl Up at the UN Foundation, and even previously with Technovation, because I saw the impact of mentorship on me and how it empowered me a lot, gave me a lot of opportunities and access to resources and networks that I needed in my career and also personal development. And maybe to reflect on my background and personal experience, I come from an area called Saqit Sid Youssef in Tunisia, near the Tunisian and Algerian border. Actually, I can see Algeria closer than Tunisia. I'm on the Tunisian land, but I can see Algeria very close. And it's, I can call it maybe a sub-rural area where we have limited access to a lot of opportunities and facilities like water and electricity as well. And when I was very young and studying at middle school, high school, I saw how each year a lot of my classmates are dropping out of school, and especially during winter, and that was due to the extreme weather conditions that we have, especially during winter, because it snows and we don't have the proper infrastructure in terms of means of transport, also no heating facilities at the dorms. So my friends, they would choose to just stay at home, to get married at a very young age. So here we're talking about child marriage, and not pursue their education. And that's something that made me really sad and made me reflect a lot from a young age. But my parents, despite that we didn't have access to facilities and opportunities, they really encouraged me to continue my education and excel in my education. And they told me that education is the one that will take you to big places, because they knew when I will go to college, there will be a lot of opportunities that I'll be exposed to. And of course, education alone is not enough, but it is really crucial, especially in rural communities, for girls to be exposed to knowledge, and also for them to be able to afterwards have employment, decent employment opportunities, and to know what's happening in the world. And even when they get married and have kids, to know how they can raise their kids. And in terms of the energy transition, what I noticed that access to energy is really crucial, because if you don't have access to warm water in winter, you will not be able to have proper hygiene, to warm yourself, to wake up energized in the morning because there will be just cold water. You will not be able to perform well in your education, your job. So energy here is really crucial, and girls and women are at the forefront of this. There is girls and women who are most affected. And I remember it's my mom, if the gas cylinder would run out of gas, it is my mom who would wake up early morning, like 5 a.m. because she has to cook for us breakfast and lunch before she goes to work. She's the one who has to go early morning, get a new gas cylinder and cook. So here women are the most affected, so they need to be the ones empowered to know if we run out of gas, what should we do? And here renewable energy plays a crucial role, and educating girls and women on how to leverage the power of renewable energy is really crucial. And it's not just about formal education, but also investing in non-formal education and providing the proper training and technical vocational training for girls and women. So yeah, not to take a lot of time. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asma. And you reminded me some old women that we met in Akkar Atiqa when we were implementing solar kits, and then when we went there to check how the contractor put the solar kits. And my team, I didn't tell my team who are all men, but it's not the issue. The issue that maybe because they didn't see that the old women there, they were the one who knew how to use the system, how to take care of it, and they were behind. When we were trying to explain for the second time, when we identified that the contractor maybe didn't use the proper language to explain how this is a simple system, and that just put like a paper, even she reads or not, but just to explain to her how to use the system, how to clean it, and how to ensure that she's using it in the proper way. And basically there was, I can't forget, a very old woman where one of my staff members, he was explaining to her husband, and then she came and she said, can you please repeat? And she was scared to understand. And when I said, my mom is the one who knew to do everything at home, as my father used to call her Minister of Interior and Economy. And she, and basically this woman, she said, I'm the one who but all these kids, they were all men and women, and that she educated them and helped them to go to the school and so on. So she said, I certainly would know how to use the system. The same, we had it in Jordan when we found out that in most of the places, the solar kit were, the solar panels were clean well, and then because women at home and the women in cooperatives understood very well that taking care of the system would allow them to have extra credits for that, and basically not only not paying electricity, but having a credit within when they sell the electricity and the system back in the system and have credit on that. So this is very, and at the same time, another old woman that she said, can you please inform me about the solar system that helps to heat water? I was so impressed that this old woman, she was so old, but she knew about the solar system and solar water heater. So this is very impressive. How we may think about misperception. Really, it's a question of misperception, and that's why maybe the misperception is coming also on the way that policy at the policy level we are maybe not to put the whole blame on the policy aspect, but the policy aspect has a major role in addressing this, that we have seen it in different places of the world. So glad to have Shada with us. She's been working a lot in this aspect and supporting us also on the policy aspect in Jordan. From your perspective, Shada, I mean, Diala did present certain policy gaps that we have them. It's actually, maybe we don't speak just about policy framework, but also how they are integrated to each other when we speak about energy, water, food, and agriculture. And but options and how to regulation out there. So from your perspective, how really we can look at from an integrated approach, the way to address the policy aspect in order to move forward in both agenda, the gender and the energy.
Thank you very much, Radia and Esra, for the kind invitation. And thank you so much for the speakers before me. Very interesting insights and things that I can actually tie to my own experience, working both at the project and policy level in energy in Jordan, I would say for over 10 years. So for me, for example, when you look at energy and gender, I think of them as two key drivers for the economy. So women being one driver and energy being, I would say, the key resource for economic growth. To borrow some terminology from Harvard's theory of economic complexity of countries, energy is a binding constraint, for example, in Jordan for the country's growth. And this is, why diagnosis is very important. We need to diagnose the problem. And obviously for Jordan's case, one of the key issues is unemployment. And the other key issue is lack of investment to generate more employment. So this is where, the new economic vision for Jordan has come about, and it was launched last year by setting an ambitious target for the country. So 1 million jobs in 10 years, $41 billion as well. That's the big target. But then how do you relate that to other issues? So to gender and to energy. And, it was rightly pointed out when the vision came out that there was not a clear gender perspective. And fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately, the government responded and did a consultative gender mainstreaming on the economic vision and issued a gender, let's say, what they called it a gendered assessment. It was an annex to the vision. But as Laura was saying, I think the gender lens has to be applied as early as possible in the design of a policy document, the design of a project, but better late than never, right? So it's important to look at the numbers as well as Christine was saying. And it's hard to look at the numbers if the data systems aren't there to begin with. But we do have some general indicators to guide us in this policy development. So we've heard of maybe the MENA paradox, that we have very high literacy for women, over 90% in countries like Jordan, but this does not translate to employment. So Jordan has actually one of the highest unemployment rates of less than 15%. So what can we do? And I think the answer to this is you need to look at it both from the national perspective, from a gender perspective, and from a sectoral perspective. And once you've done all of that, try to converge your findings from looking at the problem from all of those perspectives. So I feel like in Jordan, at least, we have all those pieces in place. So you have this economic vision, and it has a gender mainstreaming, let's say, exercise. We have a national gender strategy. We have a national energy strategy. And I think the pieces are there to try and converge them into very specific, let's say, gender responsive interventions in the energy sector. I work a lot in climate, and I think the climate agenda is very useful in helping us to apply a development lens onto policy. And the one thing that I appreciate about the climate agenda is this push for transparency, is that countries are required to put out long-term targets and to report periodically on their progress. I think similarly, the SDGs and the gender agenda are also asking us, maybe through the voluntary national reviews, to report periodically on our progress. In order to do that, again, we need to invest in our data systems. So just to give you some example as well from another policy framework that I found very inspiring in Jordan. In 2017, we issued the National Green Growth Plan. And for me, that was one of the first policy documents that I saw clearly in the design of the document, integration of the women and even people with disabilities. And in Jordan, obviously, we have a large percentage of refugees. Their situation was taken into consideration. So when we talk about green, some people think that green is all about climate and carbon and all of that. But for me, green has a key definition even in Jordan. If you open the Green Growth Plan, one of the key terminologies is not only are we building an environmentally sustainable plan, but also it has to be socially inclusive. So I think the climate agenda, the gender agenda are really inspiring us all to apply this lens on any kind of policy exercise that we do. So I'm hoping we get to a day where when the Ministry of Energy issues its energy strategy already, the gender and climate lens are mainstreamed. Of course, gender and climate are a starting point. Eventually, the whole SDGs would need to be the lens that we apply onto any planning document. And if you open Jordan's economic vision today, you will see that every project there already is linked to its impact to certain SDGs. So I think this integration is great. You work bottom up on a sectoral level and then top down on a national level. And once you've done that, then you become in a position to work more on a nexus and regional level once a country has done its own exercise on these different pieces. Just to mention a little bit about the type of gender strategies included in the vision, Jordan has identified what is stopping women from engaging in the economy as a whole, be it energy or any other sector. So transport, for example, is a key impediment for women's engagement in the economy in Jordan, but then other things as well that apply to all sectors: access to finance, formality versus informality. When women are more integrated in the formal sector, they have more access to different sources of funding and different benefits as well from the state. And then just simple things like remote work, flexible work, home-based businesses, daycare. All of these things seem small, but collectively, they have been found that they could have a very significant impact to introducing women in the workforce. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shada, and thanks for also shedding the light on the social inclusion. And that's why when we speak about the gender, it's really about a human-based approach where enabling the just inclusive energy transition is really not leaving anyone behind. And that's why the rural, when you speak about rural, they are left behind at a certain point, but you take it to people with disability, you take also all those who do not have the minimum rights, and that's why the gender perspective should be taken from this respect. And lucky are the government of Jordan having you advice on different aspects, and you have a witness, you had a key role in this, in shaping a lot of the agendas of the kingdom. And since we did experience working on this back starting 2016, the inspiration came in Morocco when I visited the COP, I was hosted there. And then not to give the whole story, but I just met a young guy who he thought I was Latino, but he didn't know that I was from Algeria. And congratulations for the Algerian Independence Day today, my country, home country. And it reminded me that he was supporting a cooperative and a group of women working in the argan industry. And when I went as a new UN staff going to the NGO zone, and then I recall I came there at 2 p.m. and they left all the meetings that I was supposed to have. And he and another young lady, they were supporting to do interpretation from the Arabic, but also sometimes the French, because they speak the Amazigh sometimes, and they couldn't understand the formal Arabic or English. And basically, they were explaining all the problems they have. It was not about electricity, about the really social problems beyond just the social norms. It's really how women in this part of the world, they do all this work, and then their husbands are in the north or in France, whatever, and they are taking care of the family and reinvesting all the revenue they get on the education of their kids. And with that, I don't know what to say, honestly, because the society have a lot of problems, and most of them are coming because women are not taking care of the woman who is half of the society. And to be honest, when I was asked as UN staff what you can do with for us, I just cried because I was just new staff. I didn't know what the really UN staff should do in this kind of context. And this is what helped me to design the Regent project to support small-scale renewable energy technologies in productive sector, and try to have an indicator that helps to address the social, economic, environmental aspect. And that's why I'm glad that we have with us Ziad, who can reflect on that and reflect how effectively we can replicate such business model. Ziad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Radia, for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to participate with you today in this interesting workshop and this panel discussion. And I would like also to thank the previous keynote speakers and panelists for the insights given in this and regarding this topic. So it was highlighted that the energy sector in general, and in particular the renewable energy sector, remains a male-dominated field across the world, and this is no different in the Arab region. However, there are several success stories and best practices of gender mainstreaming in the renewable energy sector in the Arab region. I will list some of them according to the experience we have had through the region initiative. The first best practice I will list is the use of small-scale renewable energy systems by women in rural areas in their income-generating activities, such as solar PV pumping systems, cooling in the farm, using electricity, PV electricity, generation of electricity for self-consumption through solar PV systems, etc. Here, the ISQA-led region initiative has supported the dissemination of these types of renewable energy applications in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia, as you mentioned before. The second best practice I will list is the development of appropriate financial tools or mechanisms by microfinance institutions that provide financial support to rural women to implement small-scale renewable energy systems to develop their income-generating activities. For example, Endatamil, a microfinance institution in Tunisia, has developed a loan to promote solar PV pumping in the agriculture sector. The third best practice I will list is the implementation of awareness-raising campaigns and capacity-building programs for women on renewable energy applications in the different economic sectors in which women are directly involved, such as agriculture, that are facilitated by and implemented with the support of the civil society. For example, rural women's associations for agriculture development. And the fourth and last best practice I will list is the establishment of women's networks in the clean energy sector globally and in the Arab region. For example, the Gender and Renewable Energy Network launched by the region initiative by ISQA, the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition, GWNet, and the Renew MENA initiative launched by the World Bank. We'll give some policy recommendations to synthesize these best practices into policy measures. So I suggest that to implement a coaching program for women to provide them with the necessary technical support and advice to implement renewable energy projects, because as you mentioned, and all the participants before me highlighted that there is a lack of capacity building and a lack of awareness. So rural women or women in general need to be coached to implement renewable energy systems or projects in their income generating activities. Develop innovative and appropriate financial mechanisms in partnership between the public sector and the private sectors and facilitate women's access to finance in the renewable energy sector by easing related conditions and procedures. Implement awareness campaigns for rural women on renewable energy technologies and applications. Implement capacity building programs also for women on renewable energy technologies and applications, and encourage networking and exchange of best practices among women in the rural energy sector. And I will stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ziad, for the recommendations, but also in explaining what Regent was for in terms of integrated approach, looking to the capacity building, technology and awareness use, and integrated approach from the Water Energy Food Nexus. Before, maybe I have other questions for the panelists, but I want to take questions from the floor for those, if you have any question to address to the speakers and panelists. Yes, Samer. Present yourself first, please.
Samer Zawaidi. I'm ESCWA local consultant in Jordan. Been working with the ESCWA since 2021 on developing region projects successfully in Jordan. Yes. My question for the first speaker, Ms. Diala. Ms. Diala, you mentioned that 21% women working in wind, but this is not in Jordan. Oh, sorry, this is not in MENA, because in probably these jobs are office jobs in design and sales. Probably this is global numbers, and you had some survey, but I'm not sure in which countries in this survey were.
So the surveys are global,
Yeah.
and they are done also in partnership with our partners who help us disseminate.
Yeah. Okay. And regarding cleaning, cooking stoves, I think now we're moving towards electrification of cooking. So this is maybe more into, let's say, third world developing countries, India, but India is growing very fast, and so they will remove all of this clean cooking stoves in a very quick way. There's another question about the number of women in leadership positions. It was 17% you mentioned, but this is actually, this is very good. And because I'm also involved in a global organization, and we have a women in leadership, let's say it's called the Council on Women in Energy and Leadership, CWEL, and usually we have around 20% women in top management. So this is, like, I would say, this is global, 18,000 members globally. So this 17-20% is good percent. My last comment is about the supply chain and what you said about enrolling women, or their let's say when you have a mini grid and you have, let's say, more women in the supply chain of solar. I think this is not true, because the supply chain from manufacturing to transportation to, let's say, offices, administration, design and sales, and then you have installation. So in manufacturing, I can tell you a correct figure. It's an actual figure. In Jordan, we have a manufacturer, solar PV manufacturer, and they have over 500 people, and a percent of women is 8%. So in manufacturing, let's say 8%. But in transportation, I would say 0. And at site, I would say also 0. And operation maintenance, this is, and sales and design, it's all office. So we'll have like a more of 30% women in office work. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll start from the last. Thank you so much for your questions. So for the solar PV supply chain, the manufacturing with a high percentage of women is in Asia, not in the Middle East. So I'm not very aware of a lot of manufacturing facilities anyway in the Middle East. Maybe Jordan is one of the few countries that manufactures solar PV, but Most of the manufacturing is focused in Asia, China, Vietnam, and this is where we see a large percentage of women in manufacturing facilities. So going back up, Radia would like to answer one of your questions. I don't know if I should, transition. All right, so 17% is better than nothing, but it's not good. 20% is not good. 30% is not good. We will not stop until we reach at least 50%. Only then we will say that this is a gender equal sector. And it's also, yes, you pointed out that this lack of women representation is in the whole economy, and we agree with that. And we hope that the renewable energy sector would be, or the energy transition in general would be one of the main, let's say, sectors or transitions of the future that will involve women. And as Shada mentioned, not just women, also other minorities and people with disabilities. So we are hoping that this energy transition, because of what Shada mentioned, is a green transition. It's not only a technological transition, it's a transition that involves structural change, and the way we change the way we perceive change. I mean, energy is entrenched in the whole economy and society. So we are working on the energy transition, making it represented by good gender equality and also the other minorities. And we hope that this will lead the way for a whole economy that is inclusive. And now I pass back to Radia.
Maybe just also to reflect on the cook stove, just to indicate that the access to clean cooking, specifically in the Arab region, we still have around 40 million people who do not have access to clean cooking. And this is around 10%, if I may, mostly in rural areas and areas with conflict. And when you speak about renewable energy, it's around 80% additional biofuel, traditional biomass. So technically speaking, renewable energy, as we speak, it's around 5%, around that. Between this is the Arab region average. Okay, I'm not talking about the capacities that are coming on stream. So just indicate that whatever was present on Cookstop, this is applicable in the Arab region. It's not in Jordan. It's in certain countries in the Maghreb. It's still in the LDCs and all the LDCs of the region. And this is where we basically have the major impact on women's health and obviously on the kids. The other aspect maybe just to reflect that, so you did mention 70%, I was just hearing there was a latest report speaking about 16% of entrepreneurship positions in SMEs, where the SMEs, the team behind were all women, but the leader was man, and among this you have the 16%. So the bias on all of that, how they lead the process, they lead the business, but they are behind that. And this is exactly the example I start with in Morocco. 89 women were doing the whole job and receiving less than 30% of the salary that the man received, and the boss was a man. So this is explain what it explained. And again, it's not about agenda, it's just not simple human right. That's it, as simple as that. So then maybe we want to hear from Christine, since it's not just the Arab region perspective, but basically this is a global issue, which is basically making all of us globally not on track in achieving SDG 7. And ensuring that the sustainable, the transition is sustainable and just inclusive. Christine, you still with us online, Christine?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So, Christine, we've been talking about a lot of barriers and constraints and so on. But if now we look at from since your network is an international and you have a very excellent platform in terms of reverse knowledge and sharing experiences globally between different regions and countries, how you see the international cooperation and partnerships really can leverage and address the gender balances in the energy sector?
Well, as I said, I think it's very important to create networks. Colleagues earlier on the panel have already referred to some. There's just a newly created network of the World Bank in the MENA region, Renew MENA. They had, I think, their launch conference last last week in Tunisia. We have our own network. We cooperate also through we cooperate with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and through GIZ on a mentoring program which covers Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria in the MENA region, and Egypt, which is currently ongoing. I think it's very important to work together on the one hand, because all these data issues, they can't be tackled individually. And I think the discussion on here has already raised some concerns. And by no means do we think that these numbers that are out there are perfect, but I think they are the first evidence that we could get. And it's very good. And we are often asked then also for breaking this down and for having more granular data and data more on the national level. I think it's important to work together to compare methodologies in order to have data that are comparable with each other. And I think it's very important to also share best practices. We have earlier done a publication called Women for Sustainable Energy, Strategies to Foster Women's Talents for Transformational Change. And that contains a lot of best practice examples of both the private and the public sector, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And we have lots of examples. For example, Chile is very advanced on mainstreaming gender in energy policy. We have an example from Western Africa, from the ECOWAS region, where a lot of work was done on mainstreaming gender in energy access. We know that Kenya has done a lot of work there. I know that Jordan is advanced. So I think it's important to create these platforms where we provide the possibility for exchange and learning from each other. And also in our sphere, these different regional and national networks, you know, when they meet, we had, for example, an issue that Women in Energy Network in Pakistan has organized a very successful virtual career fair for women in the energy sector, and another network from, I think it was Tunisia, was interested in replicating this. And rather than starting from scratch, they could just take up the lessons learned from another context and then adapt that to their country circumstances. So there is a lot of benefit, and fora like yours are a great initiative to share these practices and put people in touch and exchange with each other, and also challenge some of the figures, because of course what is out there is not perfect. This is just an incentive then, I think, to do more and to go in more detail.
Thank you very much, Christine. And since we speak about the exchange in experiences globally and regionally and best practices as well, the role of not just we speak about stakeholder engagement as well as a key enabler in order to address the gender and access gap. I would like to turn to Asma, since we speak about, when we speak about the gender aspect, we need to address it from my perspective, the gender and the youth together. We cannot dissociate all of that, because you well highlighted that it's just question from the education at the outset, that not only we address discrimination in all its aspects between like how we perceive white and black, how we perceive Asian and African, but also how we perceive men and women. It starts at the education and the good education that your parents provided to you and your sisters. So coming to the job and the workplace, how you see the role of the service providers in all the aspects. We speak about the context in the private sector as the business model, public-private partnerships. How you see the service providers and the strategies can very well make an indicators, look into the strategies are very much the gender is well mainstreamed, but also it's in a holistic approach.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. First, to emphasize on the role of youth, as you mentioned, we have the SG7 youth constituency. So if there are any youth here in the room or watching us online, I would highly encourage you to join the constituency, because it's part of the major group for children and youth that is mandated by the UN General Assembly. And we serve as the main engagement mechanism for young people in UN and UN related processes. And we work closely with different UN entities and also organizations. We've been working a lot with IRENA with ESQA, with UNIDO, C4All, and other entities trying to create, and not just trying, but really pushing for more spaces for young people in policy making and more opportunities for youth to be part of the energy transition in terms of policy advocacy, capacity building, knowledge, etc. In terms of service providers, how I see them supporting girls and women in the energy transition is first in terms of data, because as my fellow panelists mentioned, data is really important. So it is crucial for service providers to facilitate data collection and also afterwards access to data to different stakeholders. And first, for women, and to engage women in the process, as Laura mentioned in her presentation, because girls and women are impacted, so they need to be at the forefront and they need to be involved in data collection. And after that, I believe comes researching about different topics related to this issue, to renewable energy or sustainable energy, and what kind of solutions can exist or best practices, and then creating women-led projects or initiatives, or also like girl-led programs that would enable fostering gender equality and gender mainstreaming, then working on promoting access to education by providing scholarships for girls, providing school supplies, the proper infrastructure in terms of proper means of transport, providing or fixing the roads as well, and also creating more exchange opportunities here in the Arab region, because from my experience, what I noticed, there are a lot of programs in other regions in the global north, but fewer opportunities in the Arab region, especially in developing countries. So it is important to create these kinds of exchanges for girls to know what the best practices exist, especially in our region. What I noticed, youth are not able to finance themselves and finance their travels. And as Shada mentioned, there's the unemployment issue, not only in Jordan, in Tunisia and other countries as well in our region. So it is important to create more opportunities for youth and encourage them also to stay in their countries, give back to their countries, and contribute to the development of their countries. Then also facilitating access to microfinance, encouraging women-led businesses or MSMEs and SMEs as well. And finally, of course, monitoring the process. We cannot do an impact without monitoring the work that we are conducting. So monitoring, evaluation, learning, and impact measurement is really crucial to make sure that we are on the right track, to know what best practices work best, and to know how we can move forward the best way possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asma. And you did mention the finance, that's why, and you also point out to Shada, so I give it directly to Shada to reflect on the financial aspect, because this is a really crucial aspect. And I think based on the presentation made by both Laura and Diala, it reflected well how the challenges in terms of access to finance. Over to you, Shada.
Yeah, thank you so much, Asma and Radia. So, I mean, just a quick maybe comment I wanted to make about how we can accelerate this kind of integration of gender equality in the energy transition. I think finance is one piece, but I wanted to quickly point on something before getting into finance, which is demonstrating the economic impact. Whenever we talk about climate, gender, anything, I think it's very important to be able to do forecasting of economic impact and say, okay, these policies are going to generate X jobs for men, for women, and for other members of society. As Asma mentioned, after we've done the forecasting and implemented the project, we need to be able to do monitoring, evaluation, and assessment of the actual impact that has been created. So, and another thing I wanted to mention is, so the first one is looking at the economic impact. And this is why we see entities like the World Bank issuing climate change and development reports, because it's not enough to keep talking about climate and gender as challenges. They are development opportunities at the end of the day. So every country can take the time to do this linkage between climate, energy, gender, and what is it going to do to our economies directly in terms of jobs, investments, and companies. The second thing I found is very important is to do a context-specific intervention. So when we talk about rural communities, the financing structure in that system is going to be very different than if I'm trying to support women in the cities to develop their startups and SMEs. So on the one hand, in the rural communities, I can make use of microfunds. So the microfund for women in Jordan, for example, is one of the it needs improvement, but it's an arm. There's the CBOs, the local community-based organizations. They already have the relationships with the women. The trust is there, and they can play a role in raising the literacy of women in being able to manage finances. This still remains to be a challenge for women in general, but specifically in rural communities. But I've seen now, like banks, even in Jordan, take the initiative to have a financing credit line specifically for women. And I've also very inspired by impact funds. There's a wonderful fund in Jordan called Amam Ventures, and they target specifically women-led businesses. And they are very clear about the impact they're trying to create, being specifically women-led. So not, as Radia was saying, having a startup led by men and women employees, but really women-led startups. And then, of course, we can look at larger scale opportunities. I really was inspired by what Laura was saying about the big projects, the investment projects, the PPPs, and how in the design of those projects, and there's financing schemes in those projects, women can really be a part. Something that inspires me is, if you look at the policymakers in Jordan, at least, the number 1 or 2 person in the Ministry of Energy, Transport, Public Works are women today. And I've seen them being part of developing the policies. So the policies are the first step towards access to finance. So involving women at the policy stages is very important. And finally, I wanted to mention on the education side, I also, as well, we have a university in Jordan, the Hussein Technical University, that has specific programs for energy for women. So sometimes we need that kind of direct intervention. It's not just necessarily waiting for the pieces to fall in place. So those, I would say, are the pieces for getting finance to move towards women in energy a bit more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I don't know, Ziad, if you have something to reflect on that and how to replicate similar business model like Regen.
Yes, Radia, thank you for the question and for the business model that we tested and tried in Regent showed that there is a lack in the awareness for women, for rural women, and a lack of capacity building for rural women to inquire the necessary capacity building regarding or about renewable energy systems, and in particular small systems. Also, we have noted that specific mechanisms that are based on the microfinance, on the local microfinance, are good for disseminating such types of equipments, and that's why I listed the example of the local microfinance institution in Tunisia, in Datamwil, who designed and implemented a loan dedicated not only for women, but for agriculture and farmers who want to implement or install a small-scale renewable energy, like the solar pumping systems, and they have taken into consideration the conditions for women, and they make necessary simplification and in some other words, they ease the conditions for women to access to finance and to have this kind of funding to implement or install small-scale renewable energy systems for especially for pumping. Thank you.
Very much, Ziad. And since we did reflect several times on the data issue, but I prefer to leave it at the end because the data would be the critical, I would say, aspect where whether you take it in a positive or negative side, depending on the way you read it. That's why maybe I want to return back to Laura and to really bridge the gap between what we do on the research level with the field level. And when you speak about field, because you did mention project design and implementation, and obviously when it comes to the implementation, also we speak about project we implement before, and the policy is just an enabler. So from your perspective, how really we can translate the research and evidence-based research really in the field in order to upscale, I would say, accelerate progress on SDG 7, but also together enabling the other aspects, mainly the gender aspect.
Thank you very much for the question. I think this is the very crucial aspect on how we actually create change on the ground. And as even today, unfortunately, we can see we have scientific community, we have public sector, and we have private sector. But there are very little linkages in between all these different factions. And this is the problem. If we cannot communicate the research we have done and our findings to the ones that actually do the implementation and the design of projects on the ground, how we will ever create progress, how we will go forward. We sort of, all of these different sections speak in isolation. I can do as much research as I want. I will obviously access public sector documentation. I will look at what actually happened on the ground. I will write reports on lessons learned, what were the impacts. But if there is no cooperation, if we don't adopt a more holistic perspective in how we design, first of all, energy transition, how do we design gender mainstreaming in this? How we will ever reach those sustainable development goals overall, as we have all agreed that they're all interconnected. But why is there so little interconnection between the parties that work and try and drive the progress forward? And this is something that I have continuously come across, that either I have to work on the gender aspect, or either I have to work on the energy aspect, or then I work on sustainability and climate change. Why can we not integrate all these topics together? And I think, as I have looked at lots of projects that I have spoken to different stakeholders on the ground in different developing countries, all of them say the same thing, that there is so little cooperation between the different stakeholders and actors that work towards achieving these exact same objectives, which is ironic in a sense that we all work very, very hard and we all want to achieve the same targets, but we simply don't have enough cooperation on this. And as has been mentioned several times before, capacity building is the key. We must build capacity on the ground. It is not enough that we have World Bank or different other multilateral development banks or big organizations working on these projects and we adopt sort of top-down approach. We need to integrate those local organizations. There is so much know-how, so much research, so much practical information. But if we do not discuss with each other, we will never be able to create more targeted interventions that would actually have more impact on the ground. And then we wouldn't have hundreds of millions of dollars that are lost in project implementation just because in the design phase, there were so many factors that we did not account for. So I think this is definitely one of the key issues that the scientific community must speak more towards the ones that do the actual practical work. And this is what I see very little in my work. And even when I did a lot of stakeholder interviews on the ground in Kenya and Bangladesh, most people that do this work on daily basis, they were amazed. They're like, why do you want to talk to me? And they are the key leader or the expert in that specific niche that they do. And they're sort of like, this is very interesting. I have never been asked to interview or to share my experiences or what I have learned through years of working in the field and driving forward gender, energy, sustainable development. So, and that was very alerting to me because obviously I'm very embedded in the topic. So I thought, of course, everybody knows about it. This is it's so salient that we must drive forward these key issues. But it really isn't. It isn't at all. And anybody who is slightly outside of these sectors that we work in, they will have no idea of how important these topics are that we work with, how crucial it is that we drive forward the achievement of these objectives. So we are sort of very covered in our own little niche sector, so to speak. And this messaging isn't, I feel it's not translated well enough to wider population, to different participants. And I think these would be the key issues that I would say that communication, if we can fix that, I think we're already much better off.
Yeah, and certainly the stakeholder, as you did mention, stakeholder engagement at all levels, be it at the policy design, implementation, project planning, and so on. And this comes when we emphasize enabling just inclusive energy transition, when we say that in most of the cases, the planet doesn't have voice, and we are also harming the planet. We're not considering ourselves part of that. And number two, the kids who are born today, maybe 2050, they will be the age of the part of the workforce, and we are taking decision at their place. And women in most of the part of the world do not have access or do not have the right to vote. And obviously, we are also taking decision at their place. And this is what shows that we are not on track in achieving SDG 7 and the rest. So called engagement is key. And the kind of answer that you get from those you interviewed would not be the case if we did that. And then that's why I want before closing with the key element is really the data. You make it as an element, or you make it just as a small, I would say, insect. It depends on the way you present the data. And it comes maybe before asking Diara, because Irene have been doing a lot of work on data collection and surveying with all the difficulties when it comes to the renewable energy agenda. And I know how the leadership at IRENA, specifically at the level of the director of energy policies, who have been working a lot on this, and the topic is close to her heart since the IRENA was established. Just the data gender gap, actually, how from your perspective we can better support that monitoring of progress and to embed it in the policy aspect. And before giving you the floor, maybe just I want to mention our last visit to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We've met with the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we did mention how from an inequality addressing the gender. He said as simple as that. In 2 years, we achieved 35%, and how we did it. We didn't say it's a question of gender. We just say this is our vision. This is what we want to achieve. This is the skills that you need, and we have them already, highly educated women. We didn't give them the right to work, and that just opened the doors. Impressive for anyone who visits each 6 months the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would be impressed about the progress done at all levels. So over to you, Diara.
Thank you, Radia. Yeah, of course, data. I mean, all of us here are researchers, and we know how difficult it is. And I just want to echo what Laura was talking about. A lot of very important and useful data happening on the ground, and how difficult it is to collect this data and then to report on it and disseminate it. So, in this aspect, we rely a lot on our partners who go on the ground, because we are not on the ground ourselves. We rely on our partners who go on the ground on case studies, and we try to amplify and to give them a voice and to put it together in a way that delivers a message. When it comes to surveys, yes, all of our data is based on surveys, direct surveys with individuals, with representatives of organizations, and with companies. It's very difficult to reach the whole globe. I mean, we say it's global because we contacted everyone, but there's always, we do our surveys in many languages, but there's always languages we don't, there's always people we cannot target, we cannot reach. And especially when you go into the rural areas, there is lack of connection. So how do you really get in touch with those people and get the real data? And then there is, after the limitations of data collection, you also have to deal with the limitations of what are we really asking for. So right now we're asking for numbers of, let's say, women employed in jobs, but then a job is not any job, right? You get into the part-time or full-time job, you get into the quality of the jobs. How are women being treated on the job? So it gets a bit more complex than that. When you want to achieve the gender parity, you want to achieve it in a way that also gives women equal opportunities for good, decent jobs, well paid. You get into the pay gap, and also there's a lot of complications on how you assess the gap of gender pay. So data is very tricky. It's very tricky to collect it. It's very tricky to reach all the people, the right people who give it to you. And it's also one aspect that is also tricky is the way you delineate your system. What are you really asking for, and what are you researching? So we appreciate all the efforts and help of our partners, and we rely on their efforts as well to give these numbers and make them as specific as possible.
Thanks, Diala. Christine, you still with us, Christine? Christine?
Yes, I'm still with you.
Yeah, because we come to the end of the session and I wanted to hear from you. You've been listening virtually, and so from your perspective, just as a closing, I would say, statement from your side, or let's say insight that you can bring to this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, on the data issue, as I said, it's really important. I think we none of our organizations can tackle the issue in isolation. Cooperation is absolutely important. I think we have to work on better disaggregating data and numbers that we already collect, especially job figures. But then we have to, as Diala has mentioned, have to come up with also new indicators. And again, I think it is important that the data, that when we have it, we tell a story with them, because data by itself, often these reports then land somewhere in a shelf and nobody does anything with them. But I think you have to bring them to life, and you have to really tell them the story and give examples and encourage people and show best practices. So yes, it's important to collect, but then I think it's equally important to really work with storytelling to bring the data to life. That would be my final statement.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
And thanks for GWNet support to the region and the work that you do in the region as well. Shada, you have something to add on this in the respect of the gender and SDG 7 agenda in a rural context?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what my colleagues were saying, that it's important to collect the data, analyze it, but most important, as Laura was saying, is how do we have data-driven policy making? How do we translate this into policy? And I think one interesting model that the people working in the water, energy, food nexus always talk about, the quintuple helix. So you're talking about government, the industry, the academia, of course, and between all of those entities, you have the civil society playing the key role on the ground, and really how do you bring them in? So from our experience in Jordan, I've seen the role of center of government that can play really that, convening role of the different stakeholders. It can be at the prime ministry level, but also at the municipal level when we're talking about on a more local scale. And now more and more we hear about PPD, public-private dialogue. How do you institutionalize it? So it's not just, we have a conference on a topic once every 6 months, but how is it more of a systematic dialogue on the key issues? And we see that happening now. We have the Economic Social Council in Jordan. They're mandated to run PPD regularly on very key topics for that specific year, and they report directly to the Prime Minister. So this is a cool system that it's systematic, and I think can help to address some of the gaps we see between the public and the private sector. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is an excellent outcome. Asma? I don't want to ask you the question, but I just want to reflect on the topic before we close.
For me, what I would say, especially for our region, is that we should try to break stereotypes. And since I'm focusing on girls and youth, we'll try our best to empower girls and youth. And I say this a lot to my parents, especially to my dad. I tell him, you were like really strict with me when I was young. And it's good, of course, to be protective, and we feel you as parents. But at the same time, it is crucial to encourage girls to pursue STEM education, especially because for me, I really wanted to become an engineer, energy engineer, but I wasn't encouraged for that due to different reasons, which I don't see them valid. So it is crucial to empower girls to pursue STEM education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is also memory for my dad, who wanted all his kids to be medical doctors, but he never imposed anything. And special thank to him because he tried everything so I can enroll to a medical doctor. But at the end of the day, he was employing his kids, especially girls, to do engineering and architect, and he was proud of the results of his work. And a good memory for him. Maybe he was always my source of empowerment, always in his state. Just so to close, because one of the things that I always try to start on time and finish on time, but we started maybe 10 minutes later, but we will finish exactly in 2 minutes. Maybe in this 2 minutes, I just want to reflect that while we try to focus on a niche market related to the small-scale renewable energy technology in a real context, because we found an entry point in the Arab region, specifically because you speak about bridging the access gap, but more importantly, do it in the right way. Then you need to look at the real context, and this helps you really to address the SDG 7, the SDG 6, the SDG 1 and 2 and 13 and 5 and others. And specifically, not just the energy, water and energy, food and agriculture, but also you look at the youth and future generation, what we prepare for them. More importantly, that the work that we've been doing with the partner organizations, that we value the support and the expertise that we get from the International Renewable Energy Agency, the Global Network, but also our partners at the national level in Jordan, in Tunisia, and in Lebanon. More importantly, there are a lot of very, very good stories and business models implemented in the region that we and partner organizations trying to really disseminate this knowledge and trying to basically, as speakers well highlighted, that really we need to share experiences. Reverse knowledge always helps to bring and address issues that we may not have seen them, specifically when it comes to the social norms. And to basically, in order to also close it on a good tone, that although there are several challenges, but the opportunity exist in the energy transition to make a sustainable energy systems. And sustainable energy systems, it's with everybody, and everybody should be involved in the same boat. So let's say take the same train if we want to achieve the same target. Otherwise, some would be left behind, but the bad story that everybody will be left behind if we leave some of them behind. And that's why I think we insist on the inclusiveness, the stakeholder engagement, and more importantly, to build on this kind of dialogue in order to basically try to build and design projects, implement them in the right way, and to do our best effort in order to at least address the last mile. With that, I would like to thank our partner organizations in hosting this event, but also thank our partners also, maybe those attending virtually. But at the same time, ESCWA team and the management and the leadership of the executive secretary, who is keen really to drive the agenda forward from inclusiveness, from addressing inequality. Thank you very much.